The Acolyte. I have to talk about The Acolyte. This is going to be a little bit different from typically what I talk about on my podcast, but this has been basically my obsession this entire week, and I want to make this video podcast essentially a Manny Jacinto thirst podcast. So if you're not really into that, this is probably not the one for you, but I hope if you're like me who loves seeing his beautiful face and also love seeing Amandla and love the potential that is brewing with the two main leads of this show, which is played by Manny Jacinto and Amandla Stenberg. I think this podcast is going to be for you. And this is coming from someone who is not necessarily a Star Wars fan. Hi, I'm Monique. I am the host of Off by Purple Heart podcast, where I talk to you about K-dramas, C-dramas, BTS, and so much more. And The Acolyte is going to fall into the category of so much more. Star Wars as a property, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not a fan. As I said in my opening, I know this is the biggest IP in the world. It is extraordinarily beloved, but it's just not my jam. And it's not because I don't like sci-fi or fantasy. One of my favorite fantasy series of all time is Farscape, and it was basically a beautiful, gorgeous Muppet soap opera in space. It was just fabulous. So I really do enjoy the genre, but there's just something about Star Wars and Star Trek. Maybe it's because they're the biggest IPs. It could be just the overwhelmingly aggressive fan bases of these properties, and especially in regards to this show, which has been infamously review bombed, and there's all sorts of reasons. There are the diehard fans that feel like whatever reason, like the recent properties of Star Wars are not being true to the original universe that George Lucas has created, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. There's people that are just simply being racist and displaying a ton of misogynoir and other shit that just I don't give a fuck about, to be honest. And then there is just those that just have to join on the hype train, and if everyone's collectively dumping on something, then they must dump on it too without actually giving it a fair shot. I feel like there's a lot of bad faith takes with this show, even though I can see some of the critics' reasoning for those that are trying to look at this show with a bit of more fair lens. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I'm telling you right now, with its past 5th and 6th episode, one of the huge sparkling things about the show is Manny Jacinto's face and Manny Jacinto's portrayal of this character named Kumar, or is referred to as the stranger in the show. I'm going to be going into a lot of spoilers for this, so if you want to go completely unspoiled, just take it from me. If you want to see a drop-dead gorgeous man do some really great acting in a short span of like 6 episodes, and you are curious in finding out, I highly recommend you go see it. I don't think you need to watch any of the Star Wars properties to actually understand the basic storytelling that's going on in the show. It's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty easily accessible. Maybe having like some cursory information about what Jedis are and the entire power structure of the show, but I actually don't really think you need to get into it, because as I said, I'm not a Star Wars fan. I got into it and it's pretty exciting for me. First things first, the Blasian It couple is here. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally joking, but Manny Jacinto is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. I always knew he was gorgeous. There's a lot of weird online discourse in regards to this man and the reveal that happened in the show, because he turns out to play a pretty major villain / antagonist for this show. And you know how the girlies get about hot villains in general, right? But I knew Annie was really hot for a while, and for some reason there was this weird discourse that was like, damn, Jason Mendoza from The Good Place is actually hot, which is such a stupid take, because his face was the exact same in The Good Place. Like, his cheekbones were still cut from the gods from that show. Like, come on. Like, he still looked good. But I'll tell you, my first introduction to Manny as an actor was actually a Canadian production. Believe it or not. He is a Canadian actor, a Canadian Filipino actor, mind you, and he played a relatively similar dark antagonistic character in a show called The Romeo Section, which is kind of like a crime thriller drama. that aired in Canada, I believe like 2015, 2016. Maybe 7 people watched it, including me. But that was when I knew he already had potential. So seeing him pop up in like American productions was really exciting for me. And I've been kind of closely watching his career since. So I'm hoping that with the success already and the fandom from The Good Place, in addition to all the rave reviews he's getting for The Acolyte right now, that he will continue to explode. But him being gorgeous is just like half of the equation. Amandla as well, who has a dual role in The Acolyte. She plays twin sisters, May and Osha. And they are kind of opposing forces of ideologies. They were really young. They were on this other planet. And on this other planet, they were part of like a witch coven. And they have this incredible power that's innate within them. And it will be referred to as the Force going forward in the show. And the really main lead of the show, Osha, she was very different from her twin. She wanted to be an individual right off the bat, and she wasn't really keen on the idea of really tapping into this witch's coven, and they wanted to essentially ascend her and her sister in this kind of ritual that she wasn't really for. She wanted to have a bit of her own identity, and she kind of wanted to separate herself from the pack, which was in complete opposition to her sister, who was fully entrenched in their witchly coven and had a really like severe attachment to her twin sister, to the point where Osha just kind of wanted to breathe. And then it comes to a point where she has a choice. Does she want to be a Jedi and join the Jedi fleet, or does she want to stay within this coven, stay within this family pact, and continue to go through this ascension process and becoming this witch? And she eventually breaks off, and chaos ensues. It turns out to be a bad choice, and I really like that Amandla gets to play this dual personality, this dual role. I wasn't really a big fan of the character Osha until absolutely episode 5 and episode 6, because the ideology of that character really came forward. Because she does end up breaking away from this coven, this pact. She tries and trains to be a Jedi. They end up kicking her out because her anger issues from a lot of what happened in her past when she was still within the coven kind of comes up to the surface, and then she ends up kind of being a lone wolf and turns into like a mech tech, like a mechanic in space kind of, and she's on retainers. So essentially she's freelancing, you know, she picks up odd jobs and is very insular. And then she's kind of brought back into the fold because she is being framed for a murder of a Jedi. And we are led to believe that her sister is actually going around killing folks. And because they're twins, and a lot of people were led to believe that her sister had died in the past, that it's just her, and it just, an entire mess unfolds. Right? The one thing I have to say is the first initial episodes, they set up a lot of things, and it's nice, and I like the characters that we are introduced, but the only other character outside of Amandla's characters, which is May and Osha being the main lead, and Manny Jacinto's character is JJ, who you might know from Squid Game. He's a pretty big Korean actor. I don't know much about him personally, but I do know that man is a good-ass actor. And he plays a Jedi Master by the name of Soul as well. And he becomes an integral piece of the mystery of this show. Yeah, he is really, really good. And to me, he's like one of the linchpins that makes this show work. His acting is very good. And the runtime for each episode of this show is like about 30 minutes. So you have to pack in a lot of storytelling, and unfortunately a lot of the players that are in the main cast, out of the side of the ones that I've just mentioned, really don't interest me a lot. So episode 5 and episode 6 in particular definitely shines a highlight on the 3 actors that I talk about in a really big way. So Manny Jacinto character is revealed to be a major antagonist and villain. He says that in their eyes, he would be considered a Sith, which is like one of the main dark entities within the Star Wars franchise. But he doesn't actually call himself the Sith. He just said that that would be the interpretation of what they would think he is. And let me tell you, his character kills a shit ton of people very quickly. He kills a ton of people in a matter of minutes in episode 5, and it is shocking as all hell. And I, honest to God, did not think he was any more attractive than at that point. I'm gonna tell you right now, villains are so fascinating to me, especially villains that don't necessarily want to be the mustache twirling Machiavellian type, I need to take over the world type villains, but the villains that have genuine critiques about how society is run and genuinely want to be free to explore themselves and to be able to express themselves and how they want to. And this is kind of how Manny Jacinto's The Stranger, Quimar, is presented to us as. So my camera quickly cut off, but jumping back in episode 5, as I said, Quimar kills a shit ton of people, and it's utter and absolute chaos. What led to the events was, as I was saying, Osha and May, 2 twin sisters. The backstory that we get is that they were part of this coven, and Osha kind of wants to break free of this coven. May, having a severe attachment to her sister, essentially tells her, I don't want you leaving. I don't care that you want to be a Jedi, that you're curious about this and you want your independence. To hell with all this. You're my twin sister, you belong with me, you belong with the coven. You're gonna sit your ass down and be witchy, goddammit. Osha doesn't want to hear this, right? And we actually see a flashback of Soul, played by JJ, as a Jedi, and other Jedi come onto this planet and encounter this coven and essentially say, well, at least can we at least do a little training simulation just to see if they would even be applicable to being a part of the Jedi Order. And lo and behold, Osha has a lot of potential. May obviously does not like this. And one night, May in particular says, I don't want you leaving. I would kill you before I let you leave. So the show goes like completely 180. And then there's a massive fire, and the entire compound which the coven is housed in is completely up in smoke. So we're to presume everyone is dead, with the exception of Osha. Osha gets taken away, goes on to train to be a Jedi, flunks out of being a Jedi because of her anger issues, obviously, because, you know, what a violent and gruesome way to earn your independence and want to explore yourself. The one time where you say, I want to have something for me, and your entire family is wiped out, and you have belief that your twin sister was the perpetrator of that. That would mess anyone up, right? She ends up flunking out, becomes this mech tech, yada yada. She ends up being framed for murder of a Jedi, a high-ranking Jedi, who also happened to be one of the Jedi that happened to be there on that island when she was younger with her sister trying to recruit, right? And then she's kind of apprehended, taken into custody by a Jedi. And to prove her name, they go on a hunt and search for the actual perpetrator that is actually the killer. Because they were given some evidence to then believe that, oh, this girl had a twin? Oh, shoot. Some of the timeline's not adding up from when the kill happened, and Osha happens to be right here. So we have to investigate further. Osha's brought along, and they start investigating, needing to find out more information about May and what she's been up to and her missions. We then meet the stranger, Quimar, and then everything is all revealed in episode 5, and it's like a huge, massive, bloody showdown. The actual practical effects that they used for the lightsabers look pretty damn awesome to me. Again, I'm not a big Star Wars fan, so I can't speak to the actual technology, the alloy that's used in like the helmet that Quimar the stranger wears that is able to block the laser from the lightsabers. Girl, that's completely out of my depth. I don't get started. All I know is the choreography looked really tight. It looked really good. It was high stakes. It was bloody. It came off like a Game of Thrones episode where a bunch of the main characters just completely wiped off the surface, right? And it kind of retextualizes the show, and it makes it so much darker, and it makes it that much more fun, because now I get to see more of Osha. I get to see more of her conflict. I get to see that her sister is really taken by surprise, because she was actually working alongside the stranger, Quimera. Quimera was low-key training her, and part of the things that the Jedi were investigating is where she's getting her fight style from, how she's able to tap into the Force. Someone has to be a master, someone has to be teaching her. And it's like revealed in the last act of episode 5 that it was Manny Jacinto's character that was doing all this. And he is just gloriously hot when he's doing it. I actually liked that he has this sinister quality to him, but he's also very calm. Like, he is defending himself, he kills off all these people, but he's not just using this booming voice. His voice is pretty low throughout the entirety of the show. He does like a little high-pitched little nerdy thing when he was kind of undercover, but how he talks regularly and how he interacts with Osha, as will be revealed later on, he has very slow, like very low, soft-spoken voice, but he has a very sinister energy to him. He's got his muscles gleaming out, and I just love everything that the show is setting up, because we have the two twin sisters that are presented at opposite ends of ideology about how they look at the world, and we're supposed to think that May is the more villainous of the two sisters, and that she's the wild card, and she has no problem in killing and has killed Jedi. But the show is flirting with the idea, because after episode's 5 events, Osha is actually taken by Quimera and is taken off to another unknown planet, and they're completely isolated. And we have Osha, who has all these undercurrent anger issues, abandonment issues, and probably a lot of guilt stemming from the fact that her one wish of having her independence and having her freedom, not being told, because you're a witch, because this is your background, this is what you're supposed to do, and you're going to do it because you were born for this. The one time that she actually had autonomy when she was really young was taken away from her in the most violent and gruesome of ways. And to even go on to be a Jedi, which is what she wanted, which triggered all these events in her mind, and still to end up being rejected by the same Jedi after losing the entirety of her family, and then being left off to do like side jobs. There's got to be a lot of brewing resentment that she hasn't been able to explore, and that was what takes us into episode 6. And it's exploring that resentment within that character, and the fact that Quimera did this extremely violent and heinous act, and nothing about it should be attractive, right? He is obviously the antagonist, he's obviously the villain, it's a bad guy, but he has some points, because his main ideology is that the way the Jedi is structured, the way that they move throughout their society is antiquated. And unfortunately, he wants to be able to tap into his inner strength, his inner power, the Force, without the constraints that the Jedi will typically place on use of that power source, that energy. And Osha, having this power within her that obviously Quimera recognizes, they're kind of like two mirror images of each other. They both represent different ideologies, because obviously at this point in the show, we're still looking at Osha as the protagonist, as the good girl, as the character that is on the right side of history. You know, and Quimera, after we just saw him brutally murder how many people, is on the wrong side of the history. He is quote unquote a Sith from the dark side, is using his powers with abandon, and we're supposed to antagonize him. But the show is presenting the fact that these two actually have so much in common. There's so much oppressed feelings within them, and that they were both rejected by the Jedi, as informed to us by Quimera, that he was once a Jedi trainee, I guess, or training to be Jedi Master, and he was cast aside by his master as well. And we're led to believe that maybe it's because of his own internalized anger and things that he hasn't been able to truly bring up to the surface as well. And I like that the show is setting up a literal and mental seduction of Osha's character. And enemies to lovers is a really hard ship to let swim. But I love enemies to lovers when it's in a fantasy setting. And I do like the fact that Osha probably has a lot more darkness that we don't as an audience see as of yet, and that this character is going to be the catalyst to teasing that out. Manny looks damn hot doing it. So yeah, part of my appeal for this show was that he looked phenomenal. Like, the character design for him is just hitting every button for me. Him and Amandla have amazing on-screen chemistry, and I gotta give Amandla their roses. Amandla is fantastic as well. I don't think they're getting enough credit for the duality that she or they play in the role. I think there is definitely differences in their cadence, in how they speak, definitely their gait patterns, how they walk, and how they express themselves. I do feel like they're able to differentiate between the sisters. And I think when everything comes to head episode 6 and Osha's character like pushes Quimera right up against a cave wall with a lightsaber in hand that could kill him, and was like, I was a failure to the Jedi. I was an absolute failure. And just how broken Osha was to admitting that and actually showing us some interesting emotion was really fun for me. I just think there's so much potential in having two adult characters that potentially can have equal footing. Right now, the power dynamics are pretty skewed. It's obvious that Quimera, the stranger, as an opponent, is pretty well equipped. He is one with the Force. He can fight and is extremely quick, and his fight style is unrecognizable to the Jedi. And he obviously has fine-tuned and honed his craft, right? But I think it's interesting that, you know, Osha isn't like some shrieking violet as well. You know, she's had this Jedi training. She can hold her own in a fight if need be. She obviously has this incredible potential within her, what attracted the stranger to her in the first place. And when we first see them together in like episode 6, Quimera essentially strips down into basically nothing. He is nude and glistening in the sun and walks into the water, and she is watching all this. And he also leaves his main weapon of choice, his lightsaber. And she actually is able to get hold of it, and they have this really beautiful, intense exchange where he essentially says, you know, I am completely powerless. I am naked right here, and you've got like my main battle weapon, and I just killed a bunch of your friends. Yeah, you're definitely within your right to kill me right now and just finish this. But there's something that's obviously holding you back from that. What is that? Is that your whole Jedi training? What is it? And I love them playing into that more. Everything with this show and how it's come to this point where we have these two opposites, and they're good and evil, dark and light. Even the clothing, like Quimera's all dressed in black, Osha was in white or off-white. And then when she's abducted by the stranger from the events of episode 5, she is then in all black. And then when we're presented the audience to the stranger again, episode 6, they had to find a way to humble him and give him some humility to actually buy into the possible connection in their relationship, right? You can't just go from murdering people and then still being antagonistic and abrasive to the main female lead's face, and then expect that we're supposed to buy into like the whole enemies to lovers type connection. And he presents himself in this vulnerable way. And I guess some would argue that it is manipulation, but I read an article from the show creator, Leslie Headland, and she goes into detail that she doesn't believe what they're trying to portray here is that it's manipulation. It's his way of telling Osha the truth, that why wouldn't you use a part of yourself that has this unbridled potential? Why wouldn't you lean into this incredible power force that is within you and tap into these emotions? Why shouldn't you be allowed to feel anger and resentment over being cast aside like garbage from people that turned out to be your de facto family after seeing your actual bloodline being completely wiped out as a child? Why are you not allowed to tap into that anger and that rage? The fact that that was the key piece into kicking her out of the Jedi and her basically being left to her own devices. Yeah, why wouldn't you want to tap into that more? Look how restrictive these people, these entities are being as it is. You know? Why don't you want to explore that a little bit? Why don't you want to find out a little bit more about yourself? And I like the fact that they're two essentially lonely people that only just wanted freedom. I was watching this interview this morning, actually. Variety does its like actor on actor series, and Tom Hiddleston and Anna from Shogun were the two actors that were seated in this particular interview I was watching, and they're talking about their respective characters in their shows, and the theme that they thought both their characters shared with one another was freedom, courage, the courage to face whatever opponent, whatever evil, and then also the sacrifice that you have to make in order to make a better living circumstance for yourself or those that will follow after you. So freedom, courage, and sacrifice. Those are the main themes that they said that connected and linked their characters together, and what really resonated with audiences. And I think those three things are what are the connectors to Osha and Khmer, is that wanting and longing and desiring for freedom, the courage to actually go within themselves and discover the darkest and bitter emotions that you're afraid to face as a human or whatever you are within this universe, and the sacrifices that you have to make to finally achieve those two other things. And even if those sacrifices aren't pretty and you end up doing morally gray to full black on hat activity to achieve that level of ascension and true freedom that you're looking for. So it's all those things together. And the fact is, the two of them are just fucking together. Like, I'm gonna get superficial for a minute. Like, all the things that come into play are really fascinating to me. I truly expect that by the end of the show, whether it gets more than one season, if it gets season 2 or whatever, and they keep Manny Jacinto on the cast and he continues to be able to play this character, I don't assume that they're gonna have a happy ending. With a character that has essentially shown himself to kill multiple people within a span of like 5 minutes, I'm assuming that he's not going to end up with the protagonist female lead and everything's going to be hunky-dory in the end, and unless they do one incredible massive redemption arc, which I don't think they're going to do that with this character, but to tease the audience with the hotness and the sex appeal, but ultimately show that while Osha might fall into darkness, she will have a better understanding of her power and her reach and the force, and be able to have a little bit more autonomy going forward in this show, which I really am excited about. But they're fucking hot together. They look so good. You should see the amount of edits that are on TikTok right now, just the two of them, or just of Manny Jacinto as Khmer. It is mind-boggling. The art that's online, phenomenal. It's just sexy, and it makes it fun for me. I love fandom because fandom gets so creative, and I love that this show has inspired already a lot of like the Relyo shippers, for example. And Relyo is not exactly a ship that I was really into. Again, I'm not a really Star Wars fan, and there's a lot of controversy embroiled with that ship in particular, especially in regards to how John Bodega was treated as Finn in like the recent Star Wars film chapter, like The Last Jedi and all those films. Again, I don't care. I care about John Bodega, but you know, all the other stuff. But I do appreciate that a lot of the origins of this show is based off of the Relyo archetype of the good girl, the bad guy, and them finding some commonality amongst one another. and the potential and how it's like spurred so much creativity that it's gonna get really fun, I think, here on out. I'm so looking forward to it. They just look so damn good together. I cannot believe that for a Disney Plus show that they actually had Manny just dripping wet with his chesticles just out, just pouring down his eyes in the camera. I'm so excited for what's gonna happen with this show. And I'll be honest, I'm not a proponent, or I'm not someone that is advertising Disney Plus services. If you have other means of finding this show and watching it, you go ahead. I'm not sponsored by Disney Plus. I'm not endorsing Disney Plus. I'm just saying that's the official platform it's on. But I'm just saying, the amount of creativity that's come out, the amount of AO3 fics that have come out since like episode 5 and 6 that have just aired in the past week. It's exciting times. I love a good enemies to lovers, and I think this one's going to be really delicious. So I think if you really love enemies to lovers, and to me enemies to lovers only works in a fantasy setting, this show I think is going to be something you really enjoy. And all the other talking points that I made about what this show is trying to do as far as the power structures and all the political systems that are within the Jedi Order, and trying to dismantle that. And obviously there's like a big cover-up that's happened, and to see the more moral gray side of the Jedi and dismantle their rules and all that philosophical talk. I think there's just a lot of potential within this show, plus the acting. Again, I gotta give a lot of kudos to JJ as well. He's done a really phenomenal job. He's a good actor. He can do so much in the expression of his face, and I actually really look forward to the dynamic between Soul, the character he plays, and May, the other twin that Amandla is portraying. Their relationship as well, it's so ripe of potential, but that would be another really long video, so I'm really excited. Yeah, so that's it. That's going to conclude this podcast. Tell me what are your thoughts. Have you watched any of the Star Wars property? Are you interested in watching The Acolyte, or that's just not really your thing? If you're someone that's listening via Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I really appreciate you. I love you a lot. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be watching this show. It's a lot of fun. Just go in it with an open mind. It's not as bad as all the critical review bombing that's happened. Give it a chance. You might enjoy it, even someone that is not a Star Wars fan.